I always remember how cool and crisp the air was that October. There was always a gentle breeze up on the Saarland Mountains, despite the dense growth of trees. My childhood best friend, we'll call him Dave, lived on the top of a mountain range. His parents had a house at the end of a long road, dotted with mansions owned by millionaires. Their house was in the center of a cul-de-sac, a dwarf by comparison. Nobody complained, since the nearest neighbor was a half a mile away. We were both 17 at the time and both out of school. Dave was in a trade program, learning something mechanical, and I had dropped out to start college early. We had an odd overlap where neither of us was working or going to class that fall. Dave and I spent that time in the woods, behind his parents' house. Our favorite pastime was getting stoned and wandering through them. His parents were an odd mixture of hippie and yuppie. They made good money, but they didn't really care about us getting high. I honestly bet they got high themselves, thinking back on it. But we still preferred to hide it from them. I guess it kept the thrill of doing it alive. So we cleared out a section of the woods and built up a small fort. It had a short wall around the circular clearing with log seats and a small fire pit. We never actually got around to having a fire there. There was always talk about camping out overnight at some point. The wooded area behind his house was state land and nobody went out there. Hunters tended to keep down to the lower valley nearby, where the deer were more plentiful. And all the time we were out there, we never saw a soul. No hikers, hunters, or rangers. I can't recall a single time, and all the time we hung out there, where we stayed past dark. It was never anything we spoke about. We would make a decision to head back inside as it became twilight. It just felt like the right time to leave. Neither of us ever had a bad feeling or got creeped out. It was just a place we enjoyed being. That October changed it for me, and I never look at those woods the same. I ended up living with Dave and his family throughout the entirety of the fall. My parents didn't agree with my decision to leave school, so we spent more and more time in the woods, and our fort became a well-traveled destination. I could make my way there blindfolded, despite how dense the trees were and how confusing the path was. We were at home in those woods. I slept on a futon in Dave's bedroom on the second floor, down the hall from the upstairs bathroom. I would wake up sometimes after midnight and go to the bathroom. I remember passing by Dave while he slept. When I left the bathroom a few minutes later, I saw Dave standing at the bottom of the dark staircase, looking up at me. He was fully dressed and wide awake. Not wanting to wake his parents, I quietly asked him, what was he doing down there? His response in a stage whisper was, I want to show you something. He walked into the dark hallway next to the stairs and I heard the back door open. The door opened onto the deck, which was facing the woods where we spent all afternoon that day. I was confused, but I grabbed my boots from next to the closed bedroom door and hurried down the stairs. I figured he wanted to sit on the deck and smoke a joint or just go for a walk down the road. We rarely did that due to the lack of streetlights, but it wasn't unheard of. I walked out the back door and onto the deck, expecting to find Dave, but he wasn't there. The outside lights were still off. This was a rule any time we left at night, otherwise his parents would tear into us. I looked around the area beside the deck and thought I could make out a silhouette. At the edge of the woods, I called out to him and his response was a hushed, I want to show you something. And he turned and walked into the woods. Dave was a hard-headed guy. I mean, he was short, 5'6" on a good day, and pretty scrawny. He worked hard to prove to everyone how tough and brave he was. I assumed he wanted to camp out at the fort, or he was just trying to scare me. I didn't want to go into the woods, despite knowing them like the back of my hand. I remember it well. It was as silent as a grave. No animals, no insects, nothing. That never happened. even when we were on the deck for hours a night just getting stoned. I was on edge, but I didn't want to worry about him while we wandered through the trees in the dark. I always looked out for him, like he was my brother. He never had a great sense of direction and would get lost even in the middle of the day. I just couldn't go back inside and wonder if he'd be okay. So I decided to follow him. I walked to the edge of the woods, but I couldn't see him anymore. I called out to him and asked him to wait for me, or just to come back. From deep in the trees, I faintly heard him say, "I want to show you something." I thought my ears were playing tricks on me because he sounded too far away. There was no way that he could have made it that far in just that short time. So I walked into the woods after him. The fort was a good 3/4 of a mile from the house. If I know this way as well as I think I did, I made it about halfway. I'd stop occasionally to look for him, or just to listen for his footsteps. But I never heard or saw anything. I tried calling out to get him to come back, but he just stopped responding. At this point, I woke up enough to realize how terrible of an idea this was, and I just decided to head back. I figured I'd get a flashlight or I'd wake his parents up and get their help. Maybe there was something wrong with him and he just wasn't in the right frame of mind. I turned around and started back towards the house. I didn't get more than 5 feet before I hear him say, "I want to show you something," loudly, like he was a foot behind me. I turned to look at him, and all that I could make out was his outline. The darkness inside the trees turned him into a shadow, an absence against the backdrop of the woods. I walked backward the entire way out of there, never breaking eye contact. Every minute or two, I would hear him say, "I want to show you something." When I got back to the house and up on the deck, I made my way inside and turned on the lights in the yard. Forget Dave's parents. I wanted to know what was going on. I saw the Dave-shaped shadow at the edge of the woods, just staring at me in the house. Then I walked into the woods and it was gone. I went upstairs with the intention of waking up his parents and asking them to help me figure out what was wrong. I was seriously worried about his mental state at this point. I got to the top of the stairs to find a half-asleep Dave coming out of the bathroom. "Where were you, bro?" he asked me. I didn't know how to respond. He hadn't been outside. He was wearing a pair of boxers and nothing else. He would have had to cross the yard, go around the house, come in the front door, sneak past me, make it upstairs, and get undressed. In the time it took me to walk the 5 feet from the door to the staircase. I told him what happened, and he didn't believe me at first. I was a skeptic and didn't spook easily. And once he saw how terrified I was, I think he finally believed me. We didn't go into the woods anymore after that. That October was almost 17 years ago. I haven't been back to those mountains in over a decade. Dave died 2 years ago. Heroin overdose. He had been clean and sober for years, but he relapsed and was gone. I didn't get to attend his funeral, since I live down south now. About a year after he died, I found myself back in New Jersey visiting some friends. His name came up in a conversation a few times, and we all had stories to share. One of his ex-girlfriends asked me if it was true. The story about the night in the woods when I saw his doppelganger. I told her it was, and it wasn't just in the woods. It was in the house. I swear it sounded like him. I told her I would never forget the way he kept saying that, over and over. We parted ways, and later that night I found myself back in that town. Not on the mountain, but not far. Near the house I grew up in. I was in my friend's backyard, shortly after dark. He had gone back inside to grab some more beers, and I was trying to unwind before my drive home in the morning. The air was crisp and cool, and the sky was clear. You could see every star. It was a great night. Quiet and relaxing. Incredibly quiet. No insects. No animals. Nothing. Behind me, in the woods, I heard someone whisper. A familiar voice had said, "I want to show you something." I haven't gone back to New Jersey since,